The gas station on the outskirts of town had always been a source of intrigue for John. It was old and run down, with a faded sign and a dimly lit parking lot. There was something eerie about the place, something that drew him in. As he drove his car into the lot, he could feel the excitement building inside him. This was it, the graveyard shift. He had taken on the job to make some extra cash, but the idea of working at the haunted gas station was thrilling. The station was quiet, except for the occasional sound of a car passing by on the highway. John stepped inside and was greeted by the musty smell of gasoline and the sound of a buzzing neon sign. He checked the cash register and the inventory before settling in for the night. The hours passed slowly, with nothing out of the ordinary happening. John started to relax a bit, thinking that maybe the rumors about the station being haunted were just that, rumors. He walked around the store, stocking shelves and straightening up the displays. It was a peaceful night, and he was content with the silence. But as the night wore on, John started to feel a strange energy building up in the air. It was like the atmosphere was shifting, becoming more charged with each passing moment. He tried to shake the feeling, telling himself that it was just his imagination. But deep down, he knew that something was wrong. As he stood at the counter, staring out into the darkness, he heard a strange noise coming from the garage. It was faint at first, but it grew louder and louder until it was all he could hear. John's heart started racing as he realized that he was not alone in the station. He approached the garage door cautiously, trying to ignore the fear that was building up inside him. He reached for the handle and pulled the door open, peering inside. What he saw next would change his life forever. John's heart was pounding in his chest as he peered into the garage. At first, he couldn't see anything in the darkness, but then, as his eyes adjusted, he saw a faint glow coming from the corner of the garage. As he approached the light, he realized that it was coming from an old lantern sitting on the ground. The lantern was surrounded by a thick fog that seemed to be emanating from nowhere. John's mind raced as he tried to make sense of what he was seeing. Suddenly, he heard a soft whisper coming from the fog. It was too quiet to make out the words, but John could feel the presence of someone or something in the garage with him. He took a step back, feeling his legs shaking beneath him. As he stood there, frozen in fear, he heard a sound that made his blood run cold. It was a scraping noise, like something heavy being dragged across the concrete floor. He turned his head slowly, trying to pinpoint the source of the sound. That's when he saw it. In the corner of the garage, there was a figure. It was shrouded in darkness, but John could make out its silhouette. The figure was tall and thin, with long, spindly arms and legs. It moved slowly, almost gracefully, across the garage floor. John tried to run, but his legs wouldn't move. He was transfixed by the figure, unable to look away. The scraping sound grew louder, and the figure started to move closer to him. Just when John thought that he was going to be consumed by fear, the figure stopped moving. It stood there, shrouded in darkness, watching him. John could feel its eyes boring into him, as if it was studying him. He wanted to scream, to run, to do anything to escape the garage. But he was paralyzed with fear. Suddenly, the figure moved again. It started to approach him slowly, and John knew that he had to act fast. With all the courage he could muster, he turned and sprinted out of the garage, slamming the door shut behind him. As he stood outside, panting for breath, he realized that he had just encountered something truly terrifying, something that he couldn't explain or understand. And he knew that the graveyard shift was going to be a lot longer and scarier than he had ever imagined. As John stumbled out of the garage, his heart racing with fear, he was met with the sight of a car pulling into the gas station. It was an old, beat-up vehicle that looked like it had seen better days. Despite his terror, John knew that he had a job to do. He took a deep breath and approached the driver's window. The man inside was tall and thin, with a stern expression on his face.
"Fill her up,"
the man said gruffly, handing John a $20 bill. As John began to fill the tank, he couldn't help but notice that the man was watching him intently. His eyes seemed to bore into John's soul, making him feel uncomfortable.
"Long night?"
the man asked, his voice laced with a hint of amusement. John nodded, trying to keep his voice steady.
"Yeah, it's been pretty slow so far."
The man gave him a wry smile.
"Well, things have a way of changing quickly around here."
John wasn't sure what the man meant by that, but he didn't want to find out. He finished filling up the tank and handed the man his change, eager to be rid of him. But as the man drove away, John couldn't shake the feeling that there was something off about him. Something that he couldn't quite put his finger on. As the night wore on, John couldn't help but think about the strange encounter. The man's words kept ringing in his ears, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something was going to happen. And then, just as he was starting to feel a little more at ease, he heard a loud noise coming from the direction of the garage. It was a scraping noise, just like the one he had heard earlier. John's heart raced as he approached the garage. He could feel his palms sweating and his legs shaking with fear. But he had to investigate. As he opened the door to the garage, he saw the figure again. It was standing in the center of the room, watching him with its dark, empty eyes. John knew that he had to do something. He took a deep breath and approached the figure, ready to confront it. But just as he was about to speak, the figure disappeared into thin air. John was left standing there, alone in the darkness, wondering what was going to happen next. The encounter with the mysterious customer left John on edge. He couldn't shake the feeling that something bad was going to happen, but he had a job to do, so he tried to push the thoughts out of his mind and focus on his duties. As the night wore on, the strange occurrences at the gas station only intensified. John heard more unexplained noises coming from the garage, and he saw the figure again, lurking in the shadows. But this time, the figure was different. It seemed to be more substantial, more real. John could make out the details of its features: the hollow eyes, the gaunt cheeks, the pallid skin. The figure seemed to be beckoning to him, calling out to him with an otherworldly voice. John felt a chill run down his spine as he approached it, unable to resist its pull. Suddenly, the figure lunged at him, its cold, bony hands reaching out to grab him. John stumbled backwards, barely avoiding its grasp. He realized then that he was dealing with something much more sinister than he had initially thought. This was no mere ghost or apparition. This was something that wanted to harm him. As the night went on, the haunting continued to intensify. John saw more and more apparitions, each one more terrifying than the last. He heard strange whispers in his ear and felt cold breath on the back of his neck. He tried to call for help, but the phone lines were dead. He was trapped, alone in the gas station with these malevolent spirits. Finally, as the night approached its darkest hour, John saw the figure again. But this time, it was different. This time, it was not alone. Behind the figure, John could see a horde of shadowy figures, each one bearing down on him with malice in their eyes. He knew then that he was in real danger. He tried to run, but the figures were too fast. They surrounded him, clawing at him with their cold, bony hands. John screamed for help, but there was no one there to save him. And then, just as he was about to be overwhelmed, the figures vanished into thin air, leaving John alone in the darkness once again. But he knew that they would return. He knew that he was trapped in the gas station, doomed to suffer the wrath of these vengeful spirits for all eternity. As the sun began to rise, John was still trembling from the events of the previous night. He knew that he had to find a way out of the gas station and get help, but he had no idea how. He searched the office for any clues or information that might help him understand what was happening, and he stumbled upon an old ledger. As he flipped through the pages, he saw entries dating back decades, detailing the sales and customers that had come through the gas station. But as he looked closer, he saw that there was something strange about the entries. Some of the customers listed had strange names or addresses, and their purchases seemed odd, like they were buying supplies for some kind of ritual. John's heart raced as he realized that the gas station may have been a site of occult activity for years. And as he continued to search through the ledger, he found a name that stood out to him. The same name as the mysterious customer who had come in the night before. He knew that he had to find out more about this person and their connection to the gas station. But before he could act, he heard a strange noise coming from the garage. Cautiously, he approached the door, and as he opened it, he saw something that made his blood run cold. In the center of the garage, there was a circle of salt surrounded by candles and strange symbols. And in the center of the circle stood the figure that had been haunting him all night, holding a strange object in its hands. John knew then that he was in the presence of something truly malevolent. He backed away slowly, but the figure called out to him, its voice sounding more human than it had before. It told him that it had been trapped in the gas station for years, unable to move on to the next realm. It had been searching for someone to help it break free from its prison, and it saw something in John that made it think he could be the one to do it. John was hesitant to believe the figure, but he couldn't ignore the feeling that he was meant to help it. He asked what he could do to help, and the figure told him that he needed to find a specific object, a key. That would unlock the door to the other side. With this newfound information, John set out to find the key, determined to help the figure and put an end to the haunting once and for all. But as he searched, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, that the spirits were still lurking around every corner, waiting for their chance to strike. The mystery of the gas station was beginning to unravel, but John didn't know if he was ready for what he might find on the other side. Arched for the key, he couldn't help but feel like he was running out of time. The gas station was getting darker, and the spirits were getting more aggressive. He combed through every inch of the gas station, searching for any sign of the key. Finally, he found it, hidden away in a dusty old cabinet. With the key in hand, he approached the door that led to the other side. He paused, taking a deep breath before inserting the key into the lock and turning it. The door creaked open, revealing a blinding light on the other side. John hesitated for a moment, but he knew he had to go through. As he stepped through the door, he felt a rush of energy flow through him. The spirits were all around him, their voices filling his head, but he pushed through, determined to reach the other side. Finally, he saw a figure in the distance, beckoning him forward. He ran towards it, and as he got closer, he realized that it was the figure that had been haunting the gas station all along. The figure looked different now, though. It was no longer a shadowy, ghostly presence. Instead, it appeared to be a real person, a woman who looked relieved to see him. She told John that she had been trapped in the gas station for years, unable to move on. She had been waiting for someone to help her break the curse that had been placed on the gas station, and she believed that John was the one who could do it. She explained that the curse had been placed on the gas station by a group of occultists decades ago, as a way to trap the spirits of the dead and use them for their own purposes. But now, with John's help, the curse could be broken, and the spirits could finally be freed. John knew what he had to do. He closed his eyes and focused all of his energy on breaking the curse. He could feel the spirits gathering around him, their energy pulsing through him. And then, suddenly, he felt a release. John opened his eyes, and he saw that the gas station was no longer dark and foreboding. Instead, it was bathed in a warm, golden light. The spirits had moved on to the other side, and the gas station was at peace once again. He turned to the woman and asked her if she was ready to move on as well. She smiled and nodded, and as John watched, she disappeared into the light. John stepped back through the door and into the gas station, feeling a sense of relief wash over him. He knew that he had faced his fears and come out on the other side. As he gathered his things and prepared to leave, he couldn't help but wonder what other mysteries lay out there, waiting for him to uncover. But for now, he was content in the knowledge that he had broken the curse and freed the spirits of the gas station. The night was dark and quiet as Jack pulled up to the abandoned factory. He had been hired as part of the night crew, tasked with cleaning up the factory and preparing it for demolition. As he stepped out of his car, he couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding. The factory loomed above him, its rusted metal exterior illuminated by the moonlight. The windows were boarded up, and the only sound was the gentle swaying of the metal sign that hung above the entrance. Jack took a deep breath and made his way inside. The smell of dust and decay hit him like a wall, and he had to hold his hand over his nose to keep from gagging. The interior of the factory was a maze of corridors and rooms, each one more dilapidated than the last. As he made his way deeper into the factory, Jack could hear the distant sounds of his fellow night crew members. There was Sarah, the quiet and reserved woman who seemed lost in her own thoughts. Then there was Mike, a burly man with a friendly smile who seemed to be the life of the party. Finally, there was Rachel, a bubbly and talkative woman who was always up for a good laugh. Together, they had been hired to clean up the factory and prepare it for demolition. Jack had taken the job for the money, but now he couldn't help feeling like there was something more to this job than met the eye. As the night crew gathered together, Jack couldn't help but feel like they were in for a long and unsettling night. The factory seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy, and Jack couldn't shake the feeling that they were not alone in the building. The night crew got to work cleaning up the factory, starting with the main room. As they swept and mopped, they noticed strange things happening around them. Tools and equipment would move on their own. Doors would creak open and slam shut, and strange whispers seemed to echo through the halls. At first, the crew tried to brush off these occurrences, attributing them to their own fatigue and imaginations. But as the night wore on, the strange happenings only became more frequent and intense. Sarah had disappeared for a while, and when she returned, she seemed different. Her eyes were distant and unfocused, and she moved as if in a trance. Mike and Rachel tried to snap her out of it, but she wouldn't respond to their questions or commands. Then, they heard the sound of footsteps coming from one of the darkened hallways. Mike and Rachel went to investigate, but they never returned. Jack was left alone in the main room, heart pounding as he heard the footsteps grow louder. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was a man, dressed in old-fashioned clothing and sporting a thick mustache. His eyes glinted with a sinister light, and he held a rusted axe in one hand. Jack backed away, fear gripping his heart as the man advanced. He stumbled and fell to the ground, and the man loomed over him, the axe raised high. Just when it seemed like all hope was lost, the man vanished into thin air. Jack was left alone in the darkness, gasping for breath and covered in sweat. He knew then that something was terribly wrong with this factory, and that the night crew might be in grave danger. After the terrifying encounter with the strange man, Jack was determined to uncover the dark history of the factory. He spent hours poring over old newspaper articles and local archives, piecing together the story of the factory's past. What he discovered was truly horrifying. The factory had been the site of a gruesome murder spree back in the 1920s when a disgruntled worker had gone on a killing rampage with an axe. Dozens of workers had been brutally slain, and the factory had been shut down soon after. As Jack read through the details of the murders, he couldn't help but feel like there was more to the story than what was being reported. The murders seemed almost ritualistic, and there were strange symbols carved into the walls of the factory. Determined to get to the bottom of things, Jack shared his findings with the rest of the night crew. Sarah had snapped out of her trance, like State, and Mike and Rachel had reappeared, shaken but unharmed. Together, they decided to investigate the strange symbols and try to uncover the truth behind the murders. As they ventured deeper into the factory, the air grew colder and the shadows grew darker. Finally, they came to a small room, the walls covered in the same mysterious symbols. In the center of the room stood an old chest, rusted and locked tight. With trembling hands, Jack opened the chest, revealing a horrifying sight. Inside were the bones of dozens of workers, picked clean and arranged in a macabre pattern. The night crew realized then that they were in grave danger, and that the malevolent force that haunted the factory was not content to let them leave alive. The night crew stared in horror at the bones strewn about the chest. The realization of what they had uncovered hit them like a ton of bricks. They were not alone in the factory, and the evil that lurked there was far more sinister than they had ever imagined. As they stood frozen in fear, the door to the room slammed shut behind them, the lock clicking into place. They were trapped with no way out. Panic set in as they searched for an escape route. The windows were too high to reach, and the door was locked tight. They were trapped in the room with the bones and the symbols, and they knew that they were not alone. A cold breeze swept through the room, causing the candles to flicker and dance. The night crew huddled together, desperate for any sign of hope. Suddenly, a low guttural growl echoed through the darkness, followed by the sound of shuffling footsteps. The night crew huddled closer together, their hearts pounding with fear. Out of the darkness emerged a figure, hunched and twisted, with eyes that burned like embers. It was the same figure that Jack had seen outside earlier, but now it was inside the room with them. The night crew backed away, but there was nowhere to run. They were trapped, at the mercy of this malevolent entity that had been awakened by their meddling. The figure let out a blood-curdling scream and lunged at them, its clawed hands outstretched. The night crew braced for impact, but just as the figure was about to reach them, it vanished into thin air. Confused and disoriented, the night crew looked around, trying to make sense of what had just happened. But there was no explanation for the figure's disappearance. It was as if it had never been there at all. The night crew knew that they had to find a way out before the malevolent force that haunted the factory claimed them as its next victims. The night crew had barely caught their breath when they heard another sound echoing through the darkened halls. It was a strange, almost musical sound, like the tinkle of glass chimes. Despite their fear, the night crew knew that they had to keep moving. They had to find a way out before it was too late. As they made their way down the hall, the sound grew louder, and they could see flickers of light ahead. Cautiously, they approached, peering around the corner. In front of them was a room filled with glass bottles and jars, each one illuminated by a flickering candle. The walls were covered in strange symbols, just like the room where they had found the bones. The night crew knew that they had to be careful. They couldn't afford to make any more mistakes. As they stepped into the room, they felt a sense of foreboding wash over them. The musical sound continued, growing louder and more insistent. It seemed to be coming from the center of the room, where a large glass jar stood. As they approached, the night crew could see that the jar was filled with a strange, glowing liquid. It pulsed and shimmered like a living thing. Without warning, the jar shattered, sending glass and liquid flying in all directions. The night crew was knocked to the ground, dazed and disoriented. When they finally regained their senses, they found themselves surrounded by a cloud of mist. The mist was thick and heavy, obscuring their vision. Suddenly, they heard a voice whispering in the darkness. It was soft and melodic, but there was a hint of something sinister in its tone. The night crew tried to stand, but their legs wouldn't obey them. They were trapped in the mist, at the mercy of this unseen force. The voice grew louder, filling the room with its eerie song. The night crew felt their minds start to drift, as if they were being pulled under a spell. But just as they were about to succumb, a piercing scream shattered the mist. The night crew snapped out of their trance, scrambling to their feet. They had to get out of there before the malevolent force that haunted the factory claimed them as its next victims. The night crew raced through the darkened halls of the factory, their hearts pounding with fear. They had seen things that no human should see, and they knew that they were lucky to be alive. As they approached the exit, they heard a low growl behind them. Turning, they saw a massive figure looming in the shadows. It was the same creature that had pursued them through the factory. But now it was even more terrifying. Its eyes glowed with a malevolent light, and its jaws dripped with blood. The night crew knew that they had to fight if they wanted to survive. They pulled out their makeshift weapons and prepared to defend themselves. The creature charged at them, its claws slashing through the air. But the night crew was ready. They fought with everything they had, striking at the creature with all their might. For a moment, it seemed as if they were winning. The creature howled in pain as they landed blow after blow. But then, it let out a deafening roar that shook the factory to its foundations. Suddenly, the night crew was knocked off their feet. The creature had unleashed a shockwave that sent them flying across the room. As they struggled to get up, they saw the creature advancing towards them, its jaws open wide. But then, something strange happened. A brilliant light filled the room, blinding them all. When the light faded, the creature was gone, and in its place stood a figure that they had never seen before. It was a woman, dressed in flowing robes that seemed to be made of starlight. She had an otherworldly beauty that was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. The night crew didn't know what to make of her. They had never seen anything like her before. Without a word, the woman gestured for them to follow her. The night crew hesitated, but then they realized that they had no other choice. They needed to get out of the factory, and she was their only hope. They followed her through the darkened halls, past the bones and the jars of glowing liquid. As they walked, they noticed that the factory seemed to be changing. The walls were crumbling, and the machines were rusting away. Finally, they reached the exit. The woman turned to them and spoke for the first time. "Go," she said. "You are safe now. But remember this place and what you have seen here. It is a warning, a reminder of the darkness that lies within us all." The night crew nodded, still stunned by what they had experienced. Then they turned and ran out of the factory into the cool night air. As they looked back, they saw the woman disappear into the shadows. They knew that they would never forget her, or the horrors that they had witnessed in the cursed factory.